What's going on, y'all? How's everybody doing? We got a loaded show for you today, where we're going to talk about the murder of a Trump supporter. I have some follow-up on Kyle Rittenhouse. We're going to get into Nancy Pelosi's stunning hypocrisy, Biden's visit to Kenosha, and the disastrous effect a Biden presidency will have on this country, and some new information about the Chinese coronavirus that proves what we have known all along. All of that and more right after this. The violence and riots that we're seeing have resulted in many deaths over the past few months. Last week, a Trump supporter, Aaron J. Danielson, who was counter-protesting in Portland with a group called Patriot Prayer, was gunned down in the middle of downtown Portland. And for those who haven't seen it, here is part of the live stream that captured the whole thing. Now, very clearly, you heard someone say, "We got one over here." And then you hear the suspect ask, "Here?" And then he fired 2 shots and ran off. The suspect actually did an interview a few days later, even though he had been identified online and everyone knew who he was, but he wasn't arrested. But he did an interview where he admitted to killing Mr. Danielson.
I had no choice. I mean, I had a choice. I could have sat there and watched them kill a friend of mine of color. But I wasn't going to do that. You know, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Honestly, I hate to say it, but I see a civil war right around the corner. That shot felt like the beginning of a war.
Of course, he tried to say that a friend of his was being attacked, and he did it to protect his friend of color, which was total horseshit. He saw himself as some sort of revolutionary. He fired those shots to start a war. And those are his words. You heard it. Now, by all accounts, Mr. Danielson was a wonderful guy, and he's going to be missed by everyone who knew him. But there is a happy note that we can end the story on, though. Mr. Danielson's murderer was actually killed by a federal fugitive task force when they tried to arrest him. The admitted murderer was in his vehicle when he drew down on the feds, which obviously prompted them to open fire. He managed to drive a short distance and then jump out of the vehicle and tried to flee on foot. But he had been hit, so he fell dead a few yards into his attempted getaway. His sister gave an interview where she said that she was relieved he was dead, and that the family cut him off 3 years ago for stealing prescription pills from their mother. She said he was volatile and shouldn't have been anywhere near riots because he couldn't act rationally in that type of environment. So I think there's little chance that he legally owned that firearm. And an acquaintance of his actually said that he had no sympathy for him. That is a far cry from the outpouring of love that Aaron Danielson received on his untimely death. It speaks to the type of person that each of these men was, but it also speaks to the type of people that each side seems to attract. On one side, you have a victim who seemed to be universally loved, and on the other side, you have a guy whose sister was relieved he was dead. That in itself speaks volumes. And obviously, this is a generalization. But one side is condemning the violence, while the other side is encouraging it. So if you're on board with this Antifa, Black Lives Matter movement, you might want to step back and evaluate your life choices. I'm just saying. Now, real quick, I wanted to follow up on Kyle Rittenhouse. He is still in jail and will be until his hearing on September 25th. Of the people he shot, Huber was a domestic abuser, Rosenbaum was a child diddler, and Biceps had a firearm trained on him. His lawyer says he wasn't attacking, but that's total BS. Let's stipulate for the record that that's true. So what? How is Kyle supposed to suss that out while a mob is chasing him and hitting him with skateboards? Please. I've seen people call him a murderer because he was carrying his rifle illegally and was out past curfew. Let's unpack that for a second. According to his attorney, the rifle did not cross state lines. It belonged to a friend of Kyle's in Wisconsin. Yes, he was too young to be open carrying that rifle. I get it. But that's a misdemeanor. And guess what? The people he shot were out past curfew as well. Not to mention that 2 of them were violent felons, and the one with the gun was no angel either. That aside, he made every reasonable attempt to disengage from the situation. Of course, all of the people I've seen and heard call this kid a murderer know nothing about guns, know nothing about laws pertaining to firearms and self-defense, and still expect the police to be there to save them, all while supporting the defunding of the police. It's a wildly incoherent argument. Ridiculous. Okay, moving on, because I do have a lot I want to get to. By now, you've all seen the viral video where we see Nancy Antoinette sans mask getting her hair did at a salon that's supposed to be closed. Now, you know that, me personally, I don't think everyone needs to be wearing a mask. She is in the high-risk category, and we're going to touch on that a little later on in the show. But she is in that vulnerable population. But it's not really about whether she's wearing one. It's about the hypocrisy displayed by not wearing one, when she's all over the place saying that everyone needs to be wearing a mask. And she couldn't even tell a reasonably plausible lie. If she had said, I had one, but it got wet and didn't have another one, she might have taken a few hits from conservatives, but that part of the story wouldn't have taken hold the way it has. But she said that she didn't know she was doing anything wrong. How is that possible when she's a lawmaker who has been instrumental in designing the laws that are oppressing people and depressing businesses? That simply doesn't make any sense. And since when is ignorance of the law a defense? Laws that you helped craft. Now here's her Deputy Chief of Staff statement. The Speaker always wears a mask and complies with local COVID requirements. The business offered for the Speaker to come in on Monday and told her that they were allowed by the city to have one customer at a time in the business. The Speaker complied with the rules as presented to her by this establishment. Come on. That is a weak sauce defense. And apparently she didn't appreciate being called out on her hypocrisy and said this.
I appreciate the question, and let me just say this. I take responsibility for trusting the word of a neighborhood salon that I've been to over the years many times, and that when they said, well, we're able to accommodate people one person at a time, and that we can set up that time, I trusted that. As it turns out, it was a setup, so I take responsibility for falling for a setup, and that's all I'm going to say on that. I think that that this salon owes me an apology.
A setup? Really? They owe you an apology? Come on, Nance. That's your privilege talking. No, that's not white privilege. It's not white privilege. That doesn't exist. It's liberal privilege, or more precisely, leftist privilege. Now, the stylist has come out and said that the salon owner is being a bit of a hypocrite herself and that she doesn't like Pelosi. And she's on video herself doing hair and not wearing a mask and ignoring social distancing rules. Okay, I'm looking forward to seeing that evidence if it ever comes out. But here's the thing. Pelosi has been vocal about adhering to these rules, while at the same time getting caught on camera flouting them. Like a lot of leftists, might I add. Andy and Fredo Cuomo, Dr. Fauci, Caitlin Collins on CNN was caught on camera taking hers off after she thought the cameras weren't rolling. But if you or I or the hoi polloi express misgivings about wearing masks or point to studies that show that they don't do what they've been telling us they do, well then we're monsters. This salon owner is just trying to make a living and support her family. If she has a chance to stick it to Pelosi, go for it. Okay, we're going to take a break, and on the other side, we're going to get into Joe Biden and his visit to Kenosha. So Joe Biden decided to visit Kenosha a couple of days after President Trump did. There was a stark contrast in the way that each person handled it. First, President Trump had Governor Tony Evers send him a letter asking him not to come to Kenosha, citing redirecting resources for his visit and whatnot. And Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes gave an interview on CNN where he said this.
You look at the incendiary remarks that the president has made, they centered an entire convention around creating more animosity and creating more division around what's going on in Kenosha. So I don't know how, given any of the previous statements that the president made, that he intends to come here to be helpful. We have so much work to do. And I hope that when Joe Biden does visit, that he lays out clearly and very plainly, as he does speak very clearly and plainly about these things.
Wait, did he really just come out of his face and say that Biden speaks plainly?
COVID has taken this year, just since the outbreak, has taken more than 100 years. Look, here's the lives, when you think about it.
We choose truth over facts.
Tomorrow's Super Tuesday, and I want to thank you all. I tell you what, I'm rushing ahead, aren't I? You know, the rapidly rising I don't know.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by go. You know the thing.
You know, there's during World War II, where Roosevelt came up with a thing that was totally different than he called it the World War II. He had the War Production Board.
I don't think that word means what you think it means, Lieutenant Governor. And I know playing those cuts seems like piling on a doddering old man, but his people keep trotting him out there, and a Biden presidency would be a disaster. So any chance I get to put that out there, I'm going to do it. And there was a lot more to that Barnes interview, and we have it up on the YouTube channel, so I encourage you to try and suffer through it. It is only about 8 minutes long, but let me bring it back to President Trump for a second. Trump's visit to Kenosha, I think, struck just the right tone. He met with business owners who had their stores destroyed. He met with police and praised them in their efforts. He condemned the violence as act of domestic terrorism. Yet the left is insisting that President Trump is to blame and is inciting violence, and that we'd be so much safer under a Biden administration. Most of this unrest is taking place in leftist cities and states, But the president has offered to send in National Guard to help put down these insurrections, and the leaders in these places are saying no. So whose fault is it, really? And do you really think that if Biden were to win the election, that Black Lives Matter and Antifa are just going to pack up and go home? Of course not. They are the de facto enforcement military arms of the Democrat Party. They aren't going anywhere. But these movements inevitably eat their own, though. The minute a Biden administration makes a decision that they don't like, they are going to riot. The minute the cops kill a suspect because he or she gave them no choice, there will be riots. And the feckless left will not offer to send in any troops or offer any help whatsoever. Cities will just burn until the citizens have enough and rise up themselves to squash the riots and then vote out or recall the ineffectual leftist leaders. And I think there's some of that going on right now, which is why the left is working so hard to try and steal this election. But we'll get into that a little later on. But the president also declined to take a phone call with Jacob Blake's mother because they insisted on having their lawyer on the call. And I think he did the right thing by declining that, because nothing good was ever going to come from that. Biden, on the other hand, had no such qualms and met with Jacob Blake's father. This guy is a member of the Nation of Islam, a follower of Louis Farrakhan, and has a history of anti-white, anti-Semitic, anti-Christian social media posts. Take a look at some of these. For our audio-only listeners, in one Facebook post he says, "A cracker Jew can do whatever to a white woman for years, but let a jig try it." Another one says, "The same pink-toed Jewish people that control the interest rate control the media, they control minds and money." Wow. Another one says, "A Jew can't tell me spit, period." But of course, he used a more colorful word than spit. He had one post that said, "I'm with Farrakhan 100. Like I said, he's a follower of the Nation of Islam. And then he posted a picture of attendees awaiting the arrival of President Trump at a Young Black Leadership Summit at the White House. He captioned it, "Young Black Coons." This guy is a piece of work. And Biden's handlers thought it was a good idea to meet with him. There's no way they didn't know about this stuff. His handlers, his Secret Service detail had to vet this guy. And they didn't see any problems with the optics. Perhaps because they knew the mainstream media wasn't gonna touch it, but that's why we're here. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. While we're on the subject of Joe Biden, I need to talk about what a Biden administration will mean for our Second Amendment rights. Simply put, it will be a disaster. He is on record saying that he will take away people's assault weapons. Yes, I know, no one owns assault weapons. That's a made-up term that doesn't mean anything. But the leftist media has manipulated the language such that it has come to mean the most popular sporting rifle in the country. His VP pick is on record talking about taking guns away and sending the police to people's homes to collect them. The guy he has said will lead his fight for gun control said,
"Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore."
So make no mistake, this election is about the future of this country. Not just the next 4 years, but for generations to come, perhaps permanently. Barack Obama said that he was on a mission to fundamentally transform this nation. We have already changed so much that I barely recognize it as the country I grew up in. And if Biden wins, or should I say if the left is successful in stealing the election, the fundamental transformation that Obama spoke of and dreamed of will be nearly complete. Because they will come for him. Now, I've always been reluctant to talk about the boogaloo. I've always resisted the notion that we are on the verge of a hot civil war. We are in an ideological one, to be sure, and it is heating up with these riots. But the state of affairs we find ourselves in now make the possibility of a hot war breaking out more likely than ever. The police are being ordered to stand down and defunded, and armed citizens are feeling like they need to stand in the gap to protect not just their own property and their own businesses, but their communities at large. And that is a dangerous position for us to be in as a country. Okay, let's shift gears here for a second. Those of us who have been paying attention and actually seek out information from sources other than CNN have known for a while now that the risk of contracting the Chinese virus was not nearly as high as the leftist media wanted us to think, and the virus is not nearly as deadly as they have led so many of us to believe. The investment firm Franklin Templeton conducted a study on Americans' understanding of the actual risk involved with the Chinese coronavirus. I will have a link to the results of the study in the show notes, but here are a few key takeaways. Americans believe that people 55 and older account for just over half of the total Chinese coronavirus deaths. The figure is actually about 92%. Americans believe that people 44 and younger account for about 30% of the total deaths, when the actual figure is 2.7%. And Americans overestimate the risk of death from Chinese coronavirus for people aged 24 and younger by a factor of 50. And they think that the risk for people aged 65 and older is half of what it actually is. They believe it's 40% versus the actual number of 80%. The only consistent data point since the beginning of this pandemic has been that older people who suffer from comorbidities are far more susceptible to this virus and are at a much greater risk of dying should they contract it. The CDC's most recent numbers show that between February 1st of this year and August 29th, the age group that has been hit the hardest and suffered the most deaths involving the Chinese coronavirus is people aged 85 and over. The average lifespan of Americans is 78 and a half. So to be clear, the age group hit hardest is older than the average lifespan of Americans. But if you add in people aged 75 and older, that number is nearly 3 times the number of victims aged 65 to 74. And of course, the gap keeps getting larger with the younger age groups. That is not to minimize the deaths of those people or the pain that those families felt with their loss. But this is the type of information that CNN and MSDNC doesn't want you to be aware of. If more people were aware of these data, the hysteria around masks and the insistence on shutting down the economy for 6 months, driving small business owners into bankruptcy, sending the unemployment rate into the stratosphere, would be met with a lot more resistance from we the people. But the leftist media and government want you, the sheeple. And this study bears that out. You should take a look at it, and the next time you get into a discussion with a leftist friend, colleague, or keyboard commando on social media, you hit them with the facts and the data. The left is setting the stage for stealing this election. They started with this mail-in voting nonsense, and I keep hearing people say that mail-in voting is no different from absentee voting. It is completely different. With absentee ballots, you request them. They get sent to a specific person at a specific address. When they just send out ballots to whoever is who may get them, which opens the door to all kinds of fraud. And the only explanation I can come up with is that they are either too stupid to see the difference or are willfully ignoring it. because their level 6 Trump derangement syndrome causes them to reject all logic and reason. And then let's be honest, leftists in general already have a tenuous at best grasp on logic and reason. So they accuse Trump of undermining the Postal Service. The Washington Post and other outlets predict violence if Trump wins again, which is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And do we really think that short of him calling up the military and invoking the Insurrection Act, that violence is going to be over before November? Of course not. It's just going to be a continuation of what's happening right now. But speaking of the military, John Podesta, former Clinton acolyte, predicts that if Trump wins or refuses to accept the election results, if Biden wins, and how ironic is that? The left has spent the past 4 years refusing to accept the results of 2016. Stacey Abrams in Georgia refuses to accept the results of her race. Yet here they are gaming out what will happen if President Trump tries to do the same thing that they did last time. And of course, Hillary says that Biden shouldn't concede, so they're just setting the stage for this. But here's the kicker. A Bloomberg-funded group called Hawkfish is saying that mail-in ballots are going to be the deciding factor in this election. Here is the CEO of Hawkfish talking about the red mirage.
The reason we talk about a red mirage is, in fact, because we believe that on election night, we are going to see Donald Trump in a stronger position than the reality actually is. We are sounding an alarm and saying that this is a very real possibility, that the data is going to show on election night an incredible victory for Donald Trump. That is likely to be what we see when every legitimate vote is tallied and we get to that final day, which will be some day after Election Day. It will, in fact, show that what happened on election night was exactly that, a mirage.
They are pretty much telling us, telegraphing that they are planning on stealing this election. He's laying the groundwork. Democrats are more likely to vote by mail, and more of them are going to do that than ever before, and it's going to take a long time to count them all. They are saying the quiet parts out loud now, and every leftist thinks nothing of it. Imagine if a Republican were touting mail-in ballots and a conservative firm made this assertion. They would be screaming fraud from the rooftops. And I think anyone who applies logic and reason sees how much of a problem this is. But here's Attorney General Bill Barr laying waste to the idea of universal mail-in ballots.
Bipartisan commission chaired by Jimmy Carter and James Baker said back in 2009 that mail-in voting is fraught with the risk of fraud and coercion.
But since then, there have been
until
a lot
this
of investigations that haven't proved it.
Let me talk.
Yeah, please.
And since that time, there have been in the newspapers, in networks, academic studies saying it is open to fraud and coercion. The only time the narrative changed is after this administration came in. But elections that have been held with mail have found substantial fraud and coercion. For example, we indicted someone in Texas, 1,700 ballots collected from people who could vote. He made them out and voted for the person he wanted to. Okay? Because that kind of thing happens with mail-in ballots, and everyone knows that.
But there are individual cases. But as far as widespread fraud, we haven't seen that since.
Well, we haven't had the kind of widespread use of mail-in ballots that's being proposed. We've had absentee ballots from people who request them from a specific address. Now what we're talking about is mailing them to everyone on the voter list when everyone knows those voter lists are inaccurate. People who should get them don't get them, which was what has been one of the major complaints in states that have tried this in municipal elections. And people who get them are not the right people. They're people who have replaced the previous occupant, and they can make them out. And sometimes multiple ballots come to the same address with a whole several generations of occupants. Do you think that's a way to run a vote? This is playing with fire. We're a very closely divided country here. And if people have to have confidence in the results of the election and the legitimacy of the government, and people trying to change the rules to this methodology, which, as a matter of logic, is very open to fraud and coercion, is reckless and dangerous.
He was fired up, wasn't he? And let's not forget, not only can the ballots get sent to the wrong address or multiple generations at the correct address where some of those people may no longer be with us, but cats who have been dead for 20 years can get one of these ballots.
He was a Democrat, and Cody was a brilliant cat, and I think he would have voted party with qualifications. There's a huge push, but if they're trying to register cats, I'm not quite sure who else they're trying to register.
Now, these people could have very easily registered the cat and cast a vote as the cat. But they were honest and brought it to the public's attention. But there are a lot of dishonest people who could have used it on both sides. And this cat, and if this cat could get one, how many other pets, dead or alive, can get registered to vote and get one of these ballots? And it's not just this, but there are stories of ballot harvesting and changing ballots and throwing ballots away and all the rest of it. Nevertheless, leftists are insisting on voting this way. If you can riot, if you can get your hair done in person, if you can go shopping at Walmart, you can damn sure go to your polling place and vote. We're about to get into a topic that I don't often talk about on this show, but I've come around on abortion. Now, I am pro-life, but there was a time when I was a pro-choice conservative in the mold of Mario Cuomo, who famously said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he was pro-life, but he wouldn't presume to force his beliefs on anyone else. Which, since I've come around to the position I'm about to explain to you, I realize that that makes absolutely no sense. But I'm getting ahead of myself. A while back, I moved into the pro-life camp. I think it may have been something I saw from Steven Crowder. I can't remember exactly, but someone held up a fetal development chart and said, show me where on this chart it is no longer okay to abort the baby. And so when you look at that and you familiarize yourself with what happens from conception to birth, when someone says 8 weeks, well, what happens between 7 weeks and 8 weeks that makes it okay at 7 but not okay at 8? And I'm not going to get into the whole, go through the whole fetal development chart right now. But after that, I realized that it was killing a baby. And I did still hold out for victims of incest and rape. My mindset was that if a woman becomes pregnant as a result of a rape or incest, she should be able to abort the baby, because I felt like it was a 40-week reminder of the trauma of the rape. Perhaps it still is, but let's be honest. It's not like if they don't get pregnant as a result, they're going to forget or get over it. But this past week I saw some pictures of aborted babies, and this wasn't the first time. But something really hit me this time, and I realized that the baby had nothing to do with the evil act that brought it into existence. The baby was completely innocent, and we don't kill innocent people. Now, I still feel for the victims of rape. I know victims of rape. I know victims of rape who became pregnant as a result and chose not to terminate the pregnancy. They love that kid just as much as if they had been born, conceived in love. Now, I understand that a rape victim may not have the best support system to help deal with the trauma. But when you see what abortion does to a baby, the only support system that baby has is their mother. And I still struggle with putting a victim through that. But at the end of the day, an abortion in that circumstance is punishment for the baby that should be reserved for the animal that committed that crime. And of all the abortions performed in this country, less than 1% of them were performed as a result of rape or incest. And that's not to trivialize that 1% or less than 1%, But based on the people that I know and based on reports and statistics of women who kept the babies and raised them or gave them up for adoption, they didn't regret it. So yeah, I have sympathy for the victims of rape, but you can now count me as completely pro-life with no qualifications or equivocation. Okay, let's get you out of here with some quick hits. Take a look at this. That was not Iran. That was a Black Lives Matter Antifa protest in Oakland. Now, if you hate this country so much, why are you still here? And where would you rather be? What other country would allow such a thing? This is the only country where idiots like this can engage in this sort of behavior and suffer no consequences. Until those people chanting "Death to America" assault someone or vandalize some property or set a fire, they're free to be as dumb as they want to be. Speaking of dumb.
Because New York City knows him for the joke that he is. The people who know him best like him least. He can't come back to New York. He can't. He's going to walk down the street in New York. Forget bodyguards. He better have an army if he thinks he's going to walk down the street in New York. No, New Yorkers don't want to have anything to do with him. And he knows it. He is persona non grata in New York. And as I said, he travels with bodyguards. He can't have enough bodyguards to walk through New York City. People don't want to have anything to do with him.
Can you imagine if someone like the governor of, say, Oklahoma had said that about Barack Obama? The press would be calling for him to be drawn and quartered. He said a few other things during this call that were just mind-numbingly stupid, like it's the European virus, not the Chinese virus. What? Okay, let's clear a few things up. President Trump did not say that people should vote twice. He was suggesting, rather inartfully, as is sometimes the case when he's off the cuff, that you can check to see if your vote has been recorded, and if it hasn't, go vote in person. That's it. He was not suggesting that people engage in voter fraud. And President Trump did not call fallen troops losers and suckers back in 2018. Anonymous sources for The Atlantic, that rag that Jamel Hill writes for, published a story saying that President Trump declined to visit a cemetery in France where some of our heroes were buried, saying that they were losers and suckers. Despite leftists saying that they can easily imagine him saying this and hearing his voice when reading it, this is so far removed from what we know about him and his reverence for our country and our heroes. Yes, he has insulted individual military members and vets because he felt that they insulted or slighted him. But this anonymously sourced crap is what passes for journalism these days. Now, I want to tell you about the dumbest thing I saw on social media last week. A post from a white woman telling me and all black people what it means to be black. Now, to be fair, I've seen this post a few times and it was copied and pasted, but if you read it, it shows a lack of knowledge of our history. It gives some talking points about slavery and police patrols being started to catch runaway slaves when black folks were granted the right to vote and all that. But there's no analysis, no deep dives, just typical liberal talking points. But what got me were these last 4 lines. White privilege doesn't mean that you haven't suffered or fought or worked hard. It doesn't mean white people are responsible for the sins of our ancestors. Yet the entire post is basically making that claim. Again, incoherent arguments abound on the left. But going back to the post. it does mean that we need to acknowledge that the system our ancestors created is built for white people. It does mean that black people are at a disadvantage because of the color of their skin. It does mean that we owe it to our neighbors of all colors to acknowledge that and work to make our world more equitable. Black Lives Matter. Just so tedious. I might actually take that post and pick it apart in a future show. But anyway, folks, that is our show. I will try to do better the next time. But thank you all for watching and or listening. If you're watching on YouTube, please take a second to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. If you'd rather listen to the audio only, check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, or whichever podcast platform you prefer. And please like, subscribe, and leave a review. I would really appreciate that. We're also on the internet. Our website is thelibertycast.net. Go to the podcast page and you'll find all the latest podcasts. We're also on therightway.site. And of course, you can find us on social media, Parler, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Liberty Cast on all 4 platforms. Again, thank you all for taking some time to spend with me, and whether you're watching or listening. And until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.